our last episode, we watched Franz Josef endure the unthinkable, the death of his only son and the brutal murder of his beloved wife. Yet decades earlier, another blow had already set the stage for a lifetime of heartbreak. Before Mayerling, before Geneva, Franz Josef faced the loss of someone even closer, his brother Maximilian, whose doomed empire in Mexico became a haunting symbol of shattered dreams and imperial overreach. This is Road to Destruction, the World Wars. The year was 1864. Europe's old empires still dreamed of shaping the world beyond their borders, and none more so than Napoleon III of France, who schemed to establish a friendly monarchy in Mexico. A new Mexican empire would give France a foothold in the Americas, challenge US influence and, in Napoleon's eyes, restore Europe's prestige across the Atlantic. But Napoleon needed a royal figurehead, someone with a grand title but little political power of his own. He found the perfect candidate in Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian of Austria, Franz Josef's younger brother. Maximilian was everything Franz Josef was not: romantic, liberal-minded, a man of adventure with little patience for court protocol. He had once served as the governor of Lombardy, Venetia, but resigned in frustration after Austria's defeats in Italy. When Napoleon offered him a throne, Maximilian saw a chance to make his own mark on history, and perhaps even outshine his more reserved brother. Franz Josef was torn. He worried for Maximilian's safety and doubted the plan's wisdom. But he also saw a chance to extend Habsburg prestige and quietly rid Vienna of a restless, politically inconvenient sibling. Maximilian arrived in Mexico City in June 1864, greeted with lavish parades and grand promises. But the empire he was meant to rule was an illusion. Conservative Mexican monarchists, who had invited him, controlled little outside the capital. Republican forces loyal to President Benito Juarez held vast swaths of the countryside and enjoyed the support of much of the Mexican population. At first, Maximilian tried to win hearts and minds. He decreed social reforms, protected indigenous rights, and limited the excesses of Mexico's conservative elites. But his progressive ideals alienated his own supporters while failing to win over the Republicans. Meanwhile, the empire's real foundation, the French army, was crumbling. The United States, fresh from its civil war, began pressuring Napoleon III to withdraw his troops under the Monroe Doctrine. Facing diplomatic isolation and domestic troubles in Europe, Napoleon began pulling French forces out of Mexico in 1866. Without France's bayonets, Maximilian's empire was doomed. In Vienna, Franz Josef watched the unraveling Mexican adventure with growing dread. News arrived of ambushes, desertions, and cities falling to Juarez's forces. Each dispatch confirmed his worst fears, that his brother was trapped in a losing war thousands of miles from home. Franz Josef considered sending Austrian troops or ships, but quickly realized it would only draw Austria into a foreign quagmire it couldn't afford, especially after the devastating Austro-Prussian War in 1866. Powerless, he ordered his diplomats to negotiate Maximilian's safe passage home, but his pleas arrived too late. In May 1867, Republican troops surrounded Maximilian and his remaining loyalists in the city of Querétaro. After weeks of desperate resistance, Maximilian was betrayed by one of his own generals and captured. His fate was sealed. Despite pleas from European monarchs, including Franz Josef himself, Benito Juarez refused to pardon Maximilian. Juarez believed Mexico needed to prove that foreign-imposed rule would never succeed again. On the morning of June 19, 1867, Maximilian stood before a firing squad. He gave his executioners gold coins and asked them to aim at his heart. His last words were, "Poor Carlotta," his wife, who had already succumbed to madness after failing to win European support for his empire. The shots rang out, and with them died the last hope of a Mexican monarchy and any Habsburg claim to glory in the New World. When news reached Franz Josef, it was another hammer blow. He had lost his brother not in battle for Austria, but in a futile adventure far from home. Court chroniclers described the emperor as stricken with a grief he struggled to conceal. Ministers noted he worked in a fog for weeks, cancelling audiences and refusing to attend court functions. The empire's subjects were shocked. Rumours flew that Maximilian had been abandoned by France and by Vienna itself. For many, his execution became a symbol of the Habsburg dynasty's declining power and the dangerous illusions of 19th-century imperialism. Carlotta, Maximilian's beloved wife, never recovered her sanity. She spent the rest of her life confined to castles in Belgium, believing her husband was still alive. Maximilian's Mexican adventure exposed the gap between the Habsburgs' fading imperial ambitions and the realities of a changing world. While Europe's monarchs could still draw borders and sign treaties, they could no longer impose their will overseas with impunity. Nationalism, republicanism, and new global powers were beginning to reshape the order Franz Josef had been born into. And for the emperor himself, Maximilian's fate served as a cruel reminder. Not even royal blood guaranteed safety or success in a world growing more volatile by the year. Franz Josef had endured tragedy after tragedy, each one chipping away at his family, his hopes and his faith in his empire's future. He had buried his brother, his son, and his wife. 3 cruel blows that left him more isolated than ever, yet even greater storms were gathering. For while tragedy hollowed out his personal world, new ambitions and old rivalries were pulling Austria deeper into the Balkans, a volatile frontier where empires collided, and nationalist fires burned hotter with every passing year. And there, in the rugged hills of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the empire would seize new lands in a desperate bid to prove its strength, lands that promised glory, but were in truth a poisoned chalice that would one day bring ruin. In our next episode, Bosnia-Herzegovina, 1878, Austria's gamble in the Balkans, we follow Franz Josef's boldest move yet, and see how it planted the seeds of a war that would engulf the world. This is Road to Destruction, the World Wars.